So we're talking about sugars, and we're talking about specifically fructose as an inflammatory sugar. So the question then becomes, how do our various sources of sugar stack up in terms of the fructose content? Well, unfortunately, there the picture isn't a particularly good one. If we start with table sugar, sucrose, it's 50-50. When we look at some of our preferred sources of sweetness, honey is a good example. It's not quite as high, but it is still, while not sucrose, it is 50-50 roughly ratio of glucose and fructose. And the quantity is a little bit less because honey tends to have a little bit of water and a few other things in it. But nevertheless, it's about 50-50, so not exactly fructose free. Then we start looking at things like maple syrup, same story. Brown sugar, it's basically sucrose with a bit of molasses. Molasses, it's also, while lower in absolute percentages of fructose and glucose, they're still there in roughly a 50-50 ratio. There are some natural sugars that are syrups that are actually a little bit different. I'll highlight agave syrup, for example, because he's about 90% fructose. And so if you want to keep fructose out of your diet, agave syrup is something to be avoided. Now, there's one whole area here that I haven't touched on yet, and that is corn syrup, because corn syrup, as we're all pretty familiar with now, is widely used as a sweetener in a lot of prepared foods. So let's understand corn syrup here in terms of what it really is. Corn syrup, actually, in its innate form, has no fructose. Corn syrup is made from cornstarch, which, when it gets enzymatically cleaved, produces predominantly glucose. So corn syrup is mostly glucose, some maltose, and a few other things like that, but they're all glucose-based, no fructose. So where did high fructose corn syrup come from? Well, high fructose corn syrup is used extensively as a sweetening aid. And the reason is that in the 50s, they discovered that if you take corn syrup and convert a portion of the glucose to fructose, you end up with a much sweeter product. Because what's behind all of this, when we look at it and sort of say, gosh, you know, we don't really need fructose, and why is it everywhere, and why on earth did we take corn syrup and make it into something that's much worse for us? Well, the reality is it's sweetness. Fructose is way sweeter than the other sugars. When we set sucrose at 100 for sweetness, which is a standard on the sweetness scale, we find that fructose, pure fructose, comes in at around 160, so much sweeter. Similarly, in going in the other direction, pure glucose is a lot less sweet. 40 to 60 typically is a sort of number for glucose. And similarly with galactose, it's also a much lower sweetness level. And so in order to get sweetness up, it became attractive to incorporate more fructose. And therein lies the nut. Fructose is the bad guy here, and he is in just about everything. And I would be careful, because while I've sat here and said corn syrup innately doesn't contain fructose, read the label on the corn syrup you buy in the store, because the corn syrup in my pantry says it has fructose in it, even though on the front it doesn't say a thing.